Welcome back to my Commodore 64 Games Memories video series. This is where I look at old games and some of the technical details behind them. Today we have Intensity, published in 1988 by Firebird, developed by Graftgold. The programmer was Andrew Braybrook and the musician was Steve Turner. To analyze this in C64 Debug GUI, I'm going to need to convert the tap file to a single program file. Then we can have a look at the title screen, the game mode effects, sprite multiplexing, how the sprites seem to use some shadows, and also we're going to have a look at the animated tape loaders for Intensity, Morpheus, and Iridium. So yes, if you like these kind of technical deep dive videos, then please do consider liking or subscribing to this channel, or sending me a super thanks. They are all always very much appreciated. So here we are in Vice 64 with the ICU 64 debugger integrated. I'm just opening up the graphics map view so we can have a look at the first few pages of RAM. I'm setting up a breakpoint here between 100 and 1000 in hex so that we can actually trap the beginning of the tape loader. It's no real surprise that this starts at 2A7. You can see here that 2A7 is jumped through this vector 0302. That's a pretty standard way, a very common way, I would say, of an auto booting or auto running tape loader. Let's just save this code because I think we're going to need to use it later on if we want to analyze the tape loader in more detail. Let's call it a sensible name, so we'll just save it as an intensity and TL for tape loader, and then I always, well, tend to try always to put the start address, which is 2A7. So let's save from 2A7, I think all the way up to 0400 in hex. We can see here that the tape loader code is in two different places in RAM, which also you kind of expect to see in tape loaders of this type. Some of the code is loaded in the tape buffer before the main program loads, which is where the file name information and everything like that is stored as a tape header. So we'll remove all of the breakpoints. Now we're going to put some extra range breakpoint now between 400 and FFFF in RAM. This is so that we can trap the beginning, we hope, of this code here, which seems to be loaded. So the initial tape turbo loader code is loaded by the kernel, and then it switches to this turbo loading code, which enables the screen and has this nice little flashing border effect. And it's just loading this code here. And then oh, there we go. It's hit a breakpoint and it's already started trying to start executing the code for the next part of the tape loader at A000. Just scanning through the memory there, we can see that none of the lower memory has been touched. It's just basically the second animated loading screen, if you like. So this version of Intensity on tape has a really nice animated loading screen. It shows, and I'll progress through this in the debugger in a bit. It shows a nice animated sequence of the main parts of the game. It kind of like gives you a little tutorial before the game actually begins. We can see the loaded code here. That's what it looks like in hex code, but if we have a look through the later pages, we can see that it's loaded, what was it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a bit pages, perhaps? Yeah. Each page is a kilobyte in size, so it's actually loaded quite a significant chunk. But that's how we know that we can save between A000 and C000. So this code here highlighted in red is just because of the range breakpoint. Let's remove the breakpoints now. I'm going to put some range breakpoints now in memory which avoid this loaded animated loading screen code. So 400 A000 and then C000, so all the way up to the end of memory. So hopefully now the code that's loading, the execution will get trapped out. The reason why we're doing this is because we want to find the main game entry point where this animated loading screen, and it's loading from tape as this animation is going on. It's really quite cool, right? We want to find the point where the main game code is actually started. I'm having a look at the memory debug view here, and we can see if I enable the RAM debug view here, we can actually see that it's just the color RAM which is being updated. We can see the color RAM here updating in yellow, but we can also see a miniature version of the color RAM. So the characters are actually not being updated. The character screen isn't being updated. It's just the color RAM. Now this screen that you can see in the top right hand corner of the graphics map there, that looks like a debug working version of the color RAM. And then I think this is copied from there over to the actual real color RAM memory address. So I really do like this animated loading screen. I think it sets the tone of the game really well. I don't have a disk image of this game to be able to check what's on the original disk image, but I hope that this is included. The tape loader should, well, the animated tape loading code here should be able to run on a disk version as well. It shouldn't have any problems with that. However, the disk version won't take as long to load as the tape version, of course, so maybe on the disk version this animated intro was just included as a separate file and didn't actually do any loading in the background. Oh, there we go. 810 in hex seems to be the game entry point. Looking at the CPU history, actually, there seems to be some setup code being run in the animated tape loader screen. Look here in this CPU history. Yes, there does seem to be some setup running, and there also seems to be some timing code or something like that. So look, there's an RTI there, but then it does a branch and equal to load A with 1 branch and equal to A193. That's a load immediate with 1 there at A193, and then branch and equal to back to A193. So it looks like, yes. So it looks like, look, there's a store A1 F4 there. A1 F4. That alters the load immediate with 0 there. Okay. Really? Okay. A193, A1, that would have to be A194, right? Okay, so it looks like, I see, it sets it up and then, okay, A1D5, right, okay, I'm just trying to figure out what this code here does. Well, this stores into D404, D418 is setting up a SID sound on one of the channels, on the first SID channel there. It's setting up a nice little waveform to play with certain sustain and attack decay, sustain reduce, and then setting the volume to be F, which is 15. But it looks like there's a little load immediate there at A193. Let's go down to the code in this disassembly. A1, 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 A193. Let's have a little look. Okay, so we scroll up a little bit. So A194. Okay, look, there's a store A with 0 for A194 at A180. There's a CLI there, but the previous the previous code is setting up what looks like a raster interrupt at F1 and storing it into D012. Looks like, the interrupt control at D01A is being initialized with 1, which does initialize a raster interrupt. Okay, the IRQ vector inside the right up at the top of the end of memory in RAM. Sometimes the kernel is visible here, but the kernel is switched out and is using the RAM vector right up at the end of memory in kernel space. And it's pointing at A1D5, low byte, high byte ordering. So we switch that around to high byte, low byte, and A1D5. So it's setting up what looks like a raster-based IRQ to execute at a certain time. DD04 and DD05 is CIA2. That usually deals with NMI interrupts, not IRQ interrupts. So it's setting up the CIA2 timer as well. Great, fantastic. But the NMI interrupt vector isn't being initialized. It's initializing the IRQ interrupt vector. Okay. Let's have a look at the standard library so that we can double check these memory locations. FFFE, right, is, yeah, definitely is the kernel IRQ service routine 11 high address. FFFA and FFFB are the NMI routine. So the NMI routine is 3D5. So if we disassemble 3D5, and this is, golly, look, it's doing some, okay, maybe, okay, this looks like it's the tape loader, right? It might be the tape loader code. Yeah, it looks like the tape loader code. Initializing the color in the border, initializing the color with what's read from 2. Okay. In 0 page. Fine, whatever. So anyway, so this looks like a real entry point for where the game code is. Look, so it's stopping the interrupts. It's then putting 7F into CIA1 interrupt control register, right? And it's basically turning off all of the interrupt sources from CIA1. Okay. It's initializing FD and FE. No, it's taking the values in FD and FE, which is probably from the load routine. Yeah, that's the timer control for CIA2, right? Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit strange why CIA2's timer is being initialized to a value, but there's no CIA2 interrupt control being initialized. But okay, whatever. But yes, it's taking the values FD and FE, which I think come from the loaded code address, and it's storing those into 2D and 2E. 2D and 2E are probably used later on by the main game entry point, where it's probably doing some decompression. So let's re-loop back through the tape loader, and we'll have that breakpoint now at A1, what's it, 5.4, which is the proposed earlier point where we can actually save out the whole of memory, compress it, and then convert it to a program file. So the reason why we need this earlier breakpoint than 810 in hex, where the main game entry point was because it looks like this animated tape loading screen, it looks like it's setting up some state that then the game code relies on later on. It's certainly setting up some kind of like IRQ to trigger and everything else like that. So we'll try and save the game state and compress it to a single file starting from A154, I think. So D012 is, D012 is the raster position. So the load accumulator with D011 and branch on plus is waiting for the high bit of the raster, and then it is doing a check for the raster position equal to 16. So it's doing a high, it's doing a high bit enabled raster check for raster position 10 in hex. That code there. That's probably where the animated tape loader screen is starting to kick off its screen update during the tape load. But then it seems to check the 700 page location in memory for the loading complete, or maybe it's checking it with C1 and C2 in hex, also in 0 page for the loading to be complete. Either way, this looks like the real start of the state initialization for the transition from the animated tape loader to the main game code. So I think at this point the high bit of the raster is cleared. because that's the state that was set up in T011 there. So we need to also remember that when we convert this into a single program file, we need to reinitialize the high bit of the raster. Otherwise, this code here, which starts a raster-based interrupt at a higher raster position, it will fail to trigger the raster interrupt. We also need to initialize the I/O. So we need to have the I/O initialized, which is what we'll need to do when we initialize the processor port to a sensible value after the decompression. So the decompression code that I'm going to use is my LZMPI tool, but that does not initialize the processor port. To have the I/O enabled, it actually decompresses in all RAM mode, of course, because you want to decompress to all of the RAM. So we need to restore these various configurations, the high bit of the raster for this later raster interrupt to actually get triggered. Otherwise, it won't actually trigger the raster interrupt, and then it doesn't seem that it will actually start the main game code. So we want to, without fiddling around too much, we want to initialize as much state as we need, I think, to get this game code running from A154. I want to see if the code at 3D5 triggers at any point before the raster interrupt code triggers, and it enables the rest of the game code to start running and initializes all of the SID stuff and everything like that. So it's initializing a waveform in the SID chip, in the sound chip. And that's because this game, when it does its decompression, it's playing a sound effect with a black screen, I think. So it makes it kind of like obvious that the machine hasn't really frozen. It's just doing some work in the background. Quite a nice way of doing it. This game seems to run through several stages of decompression and memory moving around as well. So we want to be careful here about exactly what the machine state is initialized to. Oh, look, DD0E. That's setting up something to do with CIA2. Interesting. Okay. And that's being triggered inside the raster interrupt, which is the code here that runs. Oh my gosh. Okay, great, fantastic. So yeah, we really want to make sure. Yeah, that's doing the timer, CIA2 timer control. Great. Okay, so we really want to make sure that the proposed non-maskable interrupt code, which is triggered by CIA2, is not triggering before the raster-based interrupt occurs, which then enables this code to then execute the SID setup and then execute the main game entry point, which then does all of the decompression. Gosh. Because, sometimes game writers used to be a bit tricky and sneaky, and as a protection measure, they sometimes started like a timed non-maskable interrupt that would occur sometimes during decompression, or sometimes not want to occur until, well, not want to occur while the decompression was happening, and then hopefully the game would start. This was kind of like a protection check to check for any modified game code. And if the game code had been modified and it was slower decompressing or whatever, then the non-maskable interrupt would kick in. I think this code at 3D5 is not occurring because of an interrupt. I think it's actually the decompression code. Let's just double check the NMI vector, and yeah, so the end of memory NMI vector has been already overwritten. I think this is in the middle of the decompression code. The non-maskable interrupt code that was initially configured for the extended 0-page memory location at 3D5 or whatever it was, that wouldn't have run because the NMI vector is currently something different. So I don't think that CIA2 NMI related timer setup actually triggered the NMI, so I don't think that code is relevant. I think the only important thing during the animated tape loader screen was probably the interrupt kernel vector at FFFE and FFFF. I think that's the only important vector that we need to really, well, the animated tape loader screen sets up that vector. So I think that that's the only really important one. So we'll save the memory, but we need to have some I/O, processor port, screen setup and border color setup and stuff like that, just to really restore the state back to how the animated tape loader screen looks like before we start that piece of code. So let's let that decompression code, and you can see in the memory debug view, you can see how many times and how many passes through the memory it goes while it's decompressing. Then we get into this rather lovely title screen. CIA2 state does have the timer enabled, but there doesn't seem to be any interrupt source enabled for CIA2, so that's fine. So yes, this rather lovely title screen and a track mode then goes into the game. So this is the game. You fly your little thingy around, your little targeting flying ship thing, and then you tell this lander where to land to pick up the little people that are trying to escape the various different levels of this game. You can collect these R things, which are basically money, RU, which is basically the in-game money funds thing. Every time the little lander lands and it picks up someone, you've rescued a man. So once you've rescued enough people, then... Oh, I forgot to move my flying thing, my drone, out of the way of the lander. So anyway, the lander flies around to where you tell it to land, you see. So you have to get out of its way, otherwise you collide and then you lose both, which is not good for trying to get through this game. So anyway, your lander needs to rescue the people, and then once you've rescued enough people, then you can exit the level by telling the lander to land on that color cycling thing, which is going to color cycle. There we go. Once we've rescued enough people, and there we go. I got out of the way that time, and I didn't explode. We have these rather nice color cycling effects, and then we have this intermission screen where it shows us the progress. We can then choose what to build. Because we have 7 RU, we can build some extra drones and skimmers and things like that. So this is the second level. We have a lovely little kind of like a star field animating along in the background. We have these rather nice pretty graphics, right? I mean, the graphics are quite nice. They serve to give, I think, a good visual indicator about where you need to go and what you need to do. So let's use my compression tool to compress up this single file, and we'll call the A154 entry point, and we're not doing any state restoration at this point. We're just going to see what happens when it runs. And why can't I find the program file? Oh yeah, I made a typo in the file name. That's not very good, is it? Okay, let's try that a second time with the correct file name. I must need extra coffee or something like that. Let's delete the old typoed file name and run the new file name, which should work. Now, this is without any setup code. It's just running A154. And A154, which was the animated loading screen entry point, just before it gets to the main game entry point, remember, it seems to get stuck. So it's not progressing. So we really do need the extra state initialization. Of course, we need the information that we need to, well, we've got the information that we need to initialize it to. We need to initialize, what was it, F8 and F9, I think it was. Was it FD and FE? I kind of forget. We'll have a look at the code again just to really make sure. Let's load what we saved out previously back into RAM this time. That's why I used the bank RAM command before loading. Now we'll just assemble some state initialization code here now at 500. I can see from using the text screen graphics map debug view there that the screen at 400 in hex is not changed from where it was loading. So we'll just put some extra code at 500 in hex because it's in the middle of the screen, in the middle of a blank area of screen RAM, which just contains the space character. So we'll initialize the processor port to 35, which is in hex, which is like the default value, which is what the animated loading screen was assuming. We need to initialize the values into FD and FE to be C5 and 98, which is the end load address at 98C5, I think, which is what was set up from the tape turbo loader. We need to set up the high bit for the raster. We need to set up the bank 0, which is actually the last video bank at C000, the last video bank page, the last VIC bank page, if you like. We need to set up the screen and border colors also to be 0, just to be really safe. And then I think we can jump to A154. Do we need any other setup? I don't think so. I don't think we need the NMI vectors to be set up. We know that the animated tape loader screen is going to initialize the RQ vectors at FE and FFFF. So yeah, we'll just jump to A154 at this point. I think that's all of the important stuff that we need to set up. All of the other stuff, like the data direction registers and things like that, I think we can safely assume that that's going to be set up as it was from the kernel basic startup. Okay, I don't think we really need to initialize those as well. So yeah, I think we can save that code into memory, or assemble that code into memory, then we can save it back out again. We can see the code there in the debug graphics map in the text screen view there. That's what those extra characters are in the visible debug screen view there. We'll save this out, but with the modified entry point at 500 in hex. We'll save out the whole chunk of memory again. We are already in the RAM bank, so we'll recompress that now, but we'll recompress the new file. We'll also change the entry point here to be 0500. We'll compress that using my compression tool. And then we'll run it, and then it should, in theory, just work. I've enabled the border effect. Okay. SID sound effect. And that's taking rather... There we go! It's worked! Fantastic! So now we have a single program file which runs the game. Now we can have a look at the single program file in C64 Debug GUI. We have to do this because C64 Debug GUI doesn't seem to have a tape loader or tap file loader anyway. So we need to do that so that then we can have a look at the raster, any raster-based effects, and we can have a look at any sprite-based effects and stuff like that in C64 Debug GUI. So that's what that code looks like when it decompresses. You can see the code appear in the screen here, and that's the code that was just running. Okay. So we can see here that it gets into the A154 entry point after the code at 500 runs. That's basically the theory of it. Just putting a breakpoint there at 91 in hex just to see if the NMI vector does get hit before the game starts, and the NMI vector does not get hit before the game starts. So that's okay. I think we can safely say that the CIA2 timer initialization was a little bit of a red herring. The game startup code from the animated tape loader screen doesn't seem to hit that, so I think that's fine. So here we are in C64 Debug GUI. We're going to load the single compressed file now for intensity that we just created. And we can see that it's doing all of this decompression over and over and over again. This is the game decompression. Right, so we have this rather lovely title screen that we're able to look at now in C64 Debug GUI. I'm just moving the debug windows out of the way so that we can see the title screen properly. The whole point about using C64 Debug GUI is that it enables us to use this targeted raster targeting cursor or we can see straight away that the intensity logo uses multiplexed sprites. We can see that there are actually the sprites seem to be doubled up, right? So there seems to be the actual sprite in the foreground, and then there seems to be the same sprite but using a different color for the shadow in the background, which is cool, right? I think this... Okay, so because of the speed of the emulation screen updating there, I think that that flickering raster bar effect is actually meant to be flickering between two different raster bars, colors, sets, every alternate frame. And I think that that's meant to produce these pseudo colors, these in-between colors, but it's not an effect which is transferring that well to this emulated rendered view here, because the emulated render view is not updating at the correct number of frames per second, and it's also not using the persistence of vision that you would normally expect to see in a CRT version of the display. So that quickly went into the game there, and it did look like the sprites were also doubled up, and it looked like the sprites there were doubled up because it wanted to use the same sprite definition for rendering a shadow, which is interesting. The reason why we're looking at this in C64 Debug GUI is because we get these rather nice red bounding boxes. There we go, definitely using multiplex sprites, right? Those red bounding boxes indicate each individual sprite. So this full screen view here shows all of the sprites, and I think that that's, you know, 2 sprites per letter. So that's definitely using multiplexed sprites for that part of the title screen. I would say that because the title screen is using multiplex sprites, then almost certainly the game is using multiplex sprites too. This is obviously using a... Oh yes, it's updating the screen color in the background, which is obviously a raster bar effect for updating those nice colorful pieces of text on the title screen. This part of the attract mode seems to have 2 character sets or 2 screens. There's a screen split down at the bottom for press fire. We have this. Let's enable the game. Let's enable the joystick so that we can actually get into the game. There we go. My little drone thing and the little lander thing. Oh, and the people as well. The people, the rescuable humanoid or whatever they are, also seem to use double up sprites. Oh, and the R credits things also seem to use double sprites. And that's because, you know, this game actually, when you're flying your drone around, the background and the drones and everything else have a notion of how high they are above the surface of the space station, spaceship, or level background, or whatever it is. So some drones can fly higher than others, I think it was, and some drones can fly over taller structures in the background. So anyway, you need to know, or at least this game wants to represent how high something is above the background, and it wants to have nice looking shadows. So I just paused the game there. I was trying to pause it on a point where we've got more than 8 sprites. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's only 8 sprites there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each sprite has 2 sprites each, so that's 10 sprites. So yeah, we can see here as we move the raster targeting cursor up and down, we can see that just after the top sprite pair has been updated, look there, it then updates the next sprite pair just after. So yes, it looks like it's using it's not using a just-in-time model for updating the sprites just before they're needed. It's actually updating the sprites for the next multiplex sprite just after the sprites have completed. So not just before, but immediately after. So that gives the more optimal way of doing a multiplexer, because you're timing the update to be just after the sprite has been used, so you know that it's safe to then update the sprite pointers as soon as possible. This is the sprite multiplexing model that I used as well when I was producing my video for how to write a sprite multiplexer, and you can have a look back through the video history, or you can search my channel for how to write a sprite multiplexer, and you can see the same kind of like model used there. So I like this game because it's nice and colourful. You don't immediately, or while I've been playing this game anyway, you don't immediately seem to need to destroy things or shoot things. You have to rescue things, and I think that that's a nice change, right? You don't need to kill things to be able to progress in the game. Again, this intermission screen here, which shows your level progress, is also using the same kind of like multiplex sprites with doubled up shadows effect, which is really quite cool. Oops, I accidentally painted a character there onto the intermission screen. This is the next level. Again, you can fly your drone around and then tell it to land somewhere so that you can actually pick up and rescue the people. I like the sound effects in this game too. I like the attention to detail with the shadows. You can see when I fly my drone around and tell it to land and then take off again, you can see how the shadow changes with respect to the drone sprite as well. So you can see how it indicates that it's flying high and then landing and then flying up high again. I love these little attention to detail tweaks that go on in this game. This question popped up in my Twitter feed, and it was regarding who actually wrote the animated tape loader for this game. Andrew Braybrook was the programmer of the game, but he was wondering about who wrote the animated tape loader. He couldn't remember writing it, apparently, and somebody else had a credit in the tape version for this. So this actually got me wondering about how to find out who wrote the code for the animated tape loader. So let's try and do some comparison, shall we, with the tape. There's two different parts of code before the main game code actually runs. And that's the turbo loader code itself. And then there is the animated loading screen. Now these are two separate pieces of code. The tape turbo code is actually loaded by the kernel at the beginning. And then the tape turbo, and that's part of the auto run code. So here's the Morpheus loader. Let's rerun that again, but with a breakpoint enabled so that we can actually trap out onto the code. This is the Morpheus code. It starts at 2A7, which was the same start address that the intensity auto run tape turbo loading code started at. So we'll save 2A7 again from 2A7 to 0400. That's just the start of the next screen, which we can see is actually not modified at all. So we'll just save out that code, and then I'll put a breakpoint again outside of the turbo loading code memory range, and then that range breakpoint we hope will trigger for the animated loading screen, which is also present in the Morpheus tape release as well. So if you had the tape version of Morpheus, you would have seen this animated loading screen. And look, it starts at E000 this time. Remember, the animated tape loading screen for intensity started at, what was it, A000. Morpheus starts at E000. So we'll save out E000 until the end of memory. Bank is RAM, so that we know that we're not saving kernel memory, we're saving the RAM underneath the kernel. And this is what it looks like when it's loading. So you can see data is loading from tape into the debug graphics map text screens there. But then we have this rather nice falling effect of a couple of sprites being used in the game. But if we have a look at the graphics map in bitmap mode, in the debug view here, we can actually see that The left and right sprites that we're dropping down are actually not really hardware sprites. Of course, they're software sprites, which are animating or updating directly the bitmap data. Actually, I don't really think that you would call them software sprites per se, because it's just more like an animated bitmap screen. They're not randomly moving around the screen. They're not masking with each other properly or anything like that. It's just an animated effect of these sprite graphics just falling down the bitmap screen. So I wouldn't really call them fully animated software sprites in this case. So anyway, now we go to Iridium. So this is the auto running tape turbo loading code for Iridium. That was the Iridium tape file, and you can see there, look, found Iridium loading ready in the debug graphics map. So that was the Iridium tape file that's now running. It will do the same thing. We'll put a range breakpoint from 400 to FFFF so that we can try and trap out the animated tape loader that you can see when Iridium is loading. And the Iridium animated tape loader screen also starts at E000 in hex. And we can see here that actually the animated loading screen for Iridium is actually quite a bit smaller. It only looks like it loads about 3 kilobytes, give or take, of data. Basically roughly 3 full screens worth of data, and each screen is a kilobyte in size because that's the characters, right? It's 40 by 25 characters, which is 1,000 characters, and it's rounded up to 1,024, which is a kilobyte. So it looks like it's only loaded those 3 screens worth of data there, but we'll just save out E000 until FFFF, all the way up into the end of memory, basically. This is so that we can look at the code for the auto-running tape loader stuff, which is loaded into the bottom part of memory, the beginning of memory, and we'll also inspect the code which is used for the animated loader all the way up at the beginning of memory. Okay, so we can see here that the animated loading screen for Iridium basically updates the characters here, and it just updates this little progress bar as the game is loading, which I thought was rather cool when I got this game originally on tape, I think it was. And I thought that this loading effect was really quite cool. The color bar effect, well, it's not updating any color information that I can see. The color bar effect, I think, if I remember correctly, is updating the multicolor values for the screen and the multicolor character set values. We can double check that in a minute, but yeah, it's not updating anything to do with the character set. So you can see that the character set is pretty much static, so there's nothing there. Let's have a look at the IO state. So background, multicolor 1 and multicolor 2 are yeah, they're different values. So the animated colors here are just basically cycling around the colors for the screen, the background, the multicolor 1 and the multicolor 2. We can double check that by viewing the character set. Yeah, it's not updating anything in the character screen whatsoever. It's just changing those multicolor values. That must mean that this screen, well, you can see it there. Look, the screen is actually using reverse character set. So the transparent part is actually showing the background color. The foreground is black, which is a good way of doing it. Yeah, that's quite cool. If I fill the color screen there, the first 256 bytes, 257 actually, of the color RAM screen, we can see there that if I change the colors, you can see that the top parts of the screen have changed the foreground color now. So then we can definitely see which parts are foreground color. So the black is the foreground color, is the character set color. It's all of the other stuff which is going on, which is actually colorized by the background screen register. So anyway, let's do a binary comparison of the the intensity auto run tape turbo loader at 2A7 and compare it with Morpheus. So we'll use the binary comparison tool. Well, wow, we can see that actually there is virtually no code change No code change at all, practically, apart from changing the load address from A000 to E000 there. The other change here is due to the different file name. So it's a binary difference between the file name between Morpheus and intensity, which you would normally expect, right? But yeah, there's no code change between practically the Morpheus tape auto run tape turbo loader and the intensity auto run tape turbo loader. So that's pretty conclusive already that the auto run tape turbo loader is the same to all intents and purposes. Let's compare the intensity auto run tape turbo loader with the one used in Iridium now. And the one used in Iridium, well, that shows a lot of binary differences. So I think we can safely say that the Iridium code has a lot of changes there. Some of the earlier memory ranges, because it's starting to save out at 2A7, we've got some memory differences in terms of the vector tables and stuff like that. But the code later on is also very, very different. And don't forget that the Iridium auto run tape turbo loader also uses a different border color effect as well compared to Morpheus and intensity. So that was also a good hint about what was different there. When debugging the intensity animated loading screen, I noticed that it's updating sprite registers at D000 and D001, but I don't remember that it had any sprites enabled during its loading screen. So I've enabled the first sprite, as you can see in the IOD000 command there in the monitor, and that tells us that sprite 0 is now enabled, but it's not displaying anything still. So why would this code be updating the sprite positions if the sprite is not enabled normally during this animated tape loading screen? That's rather intriguing, isn't it? I guess the only real answer to that is the original programmer of the animated tape loading screen would know why they used the sprite register. The sprite which is configured is actually mostly empty apart from the bottom two rows containing pixels. Okay. Oh, it's actually full. Okay, that's even weirder. It's actually filled with FF mostly. Apart from the last few pixels, which are the kernel NMI and IRQ vectors, the kernel space rather. Apart from it's not in the kernel ROM because it's underneath the kernel ROM in RAM. But anyway, the X position seems to be 4 and the Y position seems to be 25. Well, that sprite is going to be appearing in the left-hand border mostly. Even if it's enabled, we're mostly certainly not going to be seeing it. Okay, so let's plonk the X position right in the middle of the screen. See what we get now. Okay. So the sprite coordinate values at D000 and D001, which are sprite 0, X and Y, seem to mostly mirror, the movement of the large expanded sprite definitions that are appearing in this nice colourful character grid. Okay, so it looks like the programmer of this screen has reused the sprite coordinate registers in the VIC with the sprite disabled. And that's because the sprite coordinate registers and the VIC chip registers in general can be written to and also read from. So instead of using some memory in RAM for these positions, for where the grid view gets scrolled into and whatever, it looks like it's just reusing some VIC chip registers for this effect. Okay, that's fine. Unusual, very unusual, but also quite cool. It's interesting to find this little thing here. Maybe the programmer was intending to have a sprite enabled which would render the a small sprite version of the main sprite grid. Maybe they were planning to do that or something like that, and that's why they were updating the sprite registers, but then decided to turn off the sprite. Potentially, I don't know. But if this triggers a memory in the original author of why they used the sprite register for sprite 0, x, and y, then maybe they could comment on this YouTube video, or reach out to me on Twitter or something like that. Maybe it's something which sparks a memory from the original author of this code as to why they did that. It's quite an unusual thing. Now we've already analysed the auto run tape turbo loader code, let's analyse the animated tape loader screens now. So this is the intensity code that was loaded at the A000, right, which is where the intensity animated tape loader screen goes. So let's disassemble the first 128 bytes, roughly, of that code. Let's look at them side by side to see if we can look or find any kind of like fingerprints. So when people write code, sometimes their code contains stylistic points or repeating patterns about how that person codes something. And when I was looking through this code here, the code in intensity at A057 does set up the CIA2 port data direction register properly before updating the port value itself. The first 2 bits of the CIA2 port there actually corresponds to the VIC bank, which is visible. And this is the Morpheus animated tape loader code, and the Morpheus code here in this second window also does the same thing. It does this data direction register update first, and then it updates the actual port itself to reflect the bits that are needed for the VIC chip bank. In both cases, this is displaying graphics, or telling the VIC chip to display graphics from bank 0, which is the last bank. Okay, it's 0 in binary, but some people, and I call it bank 3 because it's the bank up at the end of memory. It's from C000 all the way up until the end of memory at FF. So Morpheus, intensity and Morpheus animated screens use this same piece of code, which is like a fingerprint. It's kind of like a piece of code which jumps out at me as being very correct, but also reused across these 2 pieces of code. In the Iridium screen, if we have a look at the Iridium animated loading screen, we can see the same block of code, the same kind of like fingerprint. Now, this is the correct way of updating the CIA2 port, which updates the VIC chip rendered bank. Okay, this is the correct way of doing it, but it is also stylistically identical. The code appears in different places, and that's because the animated screens do it in different ways. But this kind of like, when I look at these 3 different pieces of code for the 3 different animated tape loaders, it feels like, because of this fingerprint, it feels like it was the same author for all 3 pieces of code. I can't say for certain that it was the same person, but it feels like the code was written by the same person, or the person who is writing this code was maybe using the same original code, which uses this kind of like correct way of updating the VIC chip bank, right? And it is a very, very correct way of doing it. It's very, very, but it's standard code, but it's the ordering of updating the data direction register and then updating the actual port value itself is quite stylistically, I think, significant, right? If I look at the code when it's loaded in ICU64, I don't see any kind of like initials. I don't see any names for who wrote that code. I really just feel that when I'm looking at this code, that stylistically it was all written by the same person across Intensity, Morpheus, and Iridium. Or the other thing is that it was using original code from somebody else, and then it was just updated with different graphical effects. But then the graphical effects between Iridium and Morpheus and Intensity are very, very different, right? Morpheus has this animated bitmap. Iridium has this reversed character background color and multicolor update going on. And Intensity has this animated, large, expanded sprite grid going on. So stylistically, they are three very different animated tape loading screens, but they have this same kind of like block of code. So maybe if it was two different authors, and if Andrew Braybrook did write the Morpheus and Iridium animated loading screen, but didn't write the one for Intensity, maybe it used the same originating code, or maybe it used the same kind of like standard library of routines that were included. Or maybe just two different programmers just used the same kind of like stylistically same way of updating the VIC chip bank. Going through the next couple of chunks of disassembled code, I really don't see any other code which jumps out as being stylistically significant. Intensity is updating the VIC chip registers, right? Fine. Morpheus and Iridium, they're doing various bits of update, right? So we have the same kind of like jump there in the Morpheus code to start running the game, but what was it? Iridium was on the right, right? I mean, the jump indirected to 8000, which is E0C6 there, look, on the right-hand side, on the right-hand window there. That is jumping indirected through to the warm start reset vector routine, right? Which the kernel usually checks to see if there's a cartridge plugged in. Again, looking through the rest of the code. So the Iridium code is a lot shorter compared to Intensity and Morpheus. So Morpheus and Intensity seem to share some similarities between the way that they start the main game code. They do some initialization, then they call the main game entry point, for example. Intensity starts this raster-based interrupt and does some convoluted way, semi-convoluted way anyway, before it starts the main game code. That might be a way of it trying to fool the path of the startup from the tape turbo loader to the actual main game code. It might be trying to do some like protection obfuscation there, perhaps, or maybe it's just some way that the programmer decided that they wanted to synchronize their screen change. They wanted to synchronize it to a raster interrupt to make sure that the screen change was clean between the animated tape loader and the game code itself. Perhaps that was the reason. Although starting the CIA2, the normal NMI CIA2 timer, without actually starting the interrupt source for CIA2 was also kind of like intriguing, right? But yeah, if I look at just the code for Intensity in the debug graphics map view there, if I look at the raw data in terms of ROM characters, look, I don't see any initials, I don't see any names or handles or tags or anything. It really is just code which updates the sprites. Let's have a look at that data. Well, that's compressed sprite data at A800, A00 onwards to C00. There we go. There's the expanded sprite. So it was actually loading compressed sprite data, and then it looked like it decompressed the sprites actually into the last VIC bank as well. That's intriguing. That's quite a nice little find. Let's see if we edit the sprites here. I'm using the graphics debug view here to edit the sprite data. So I'm just pasting pixels now into the sprite data. Let's see what we get. So yeah, if I paste more and more pixels into the sprites, into the last Vic bank there, we can see that the sprites that are visible, let's just turn on the tape. Let's stop the tape so that this screen won't continue on. We can see as I paste more and more pixels into the sprite definitions, then the more corrupt the sprites appear in the large, like expanded or blown up sprite view there on the animated screen. Because the sprites are actually also, decompressed and visible in the debug graphics map view there in the last Vic bank, and because this code was updating the sprite registers, maybe it was the purpose of the original initial designs for this animated screen to have a small version of the sprite visible on the screen using the hardware sprite moving around on the screen, and also have the expanded sprite visible as well in the background. So maybe that was the intention, because the sprites are there in the last Vic bank. So anyway, I think we'll leave this video there. I think I've uncovered enough interesting little technical tidbits, if you like, to have a nice full video. If you like these kind of deep technical dives into old Commodore 64 retro games, then please do consider liking or subscribing to my channel. And if you really liked the content, then a super thanks is always very much appreciated. Thank you very much to my channel supporters for their likes and subs, and also super thanks. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Have a great day, evening, or night, wherever you are.